the woman who refused to give up her seat and the bus ride that changed America. Real story of Rosa Parks. Segment 1. Rosa Parks, Early Life and Education. Before Rosa Parks made history by staying seated, she had already learned how to stand up, in her own quiet way, against injustice. She was born Rosa Louise Macaulay on February 4, 1913, in Tuskegee, Alabama, a state in the southern United States known for its deeply entrenched segregation laws. She grew up in a world where the color of your skin determined almost every part of your life. Where you could sit, which schools you could attend, and how you were treated by others. But Rosa's early life also gave her the strength, values, and dignity that would shape her future resistance. A childhood of divisions and discipline. Rosa's father, James Macaulay, was a carpenter, and her mother, Leona, was a teacher. When Rosa was just 2 years old, her parents separated. She and her younger brother, Sylvester, moved with their mother to Pine Level, Alabama, to live with her maternal grandparents, former slaves who had lived through the Civil War and Reconstruction. Their home was small and wooden, surrounded by fields and dirt roads, but it was also filled with love, strict rules, and a sense of pride. Rosa's grandfather often sat on the porch with a shotgun at night, ready to defend the family against racist attacks by the Ku Klux Klan, who regularly threatened black families in the area. Rosa remembered these nights vividly. Even as a child, she could feel the tension, the fear of being hurt simply for being who you were. Despite living in fear, her family emphasized dignity and discipline. Her grandmother taught her to pray, and her mother taught her to read by age 5. Rosa devoured every book she could find, from the Bible to American history, and she loved to listen to stories about justice and bravery. School and the taste of inequality. At age 11, Rosa enrolled in the Montgomery Industrial School for Girls, a private school run by white women who believed in equal education. There, Rosa learned sewing, cooking, and proper etiquette, but also leadership and critical thinking. It was one of the first places where she was treated with respect by white adults, something rare in the South at that time. She later attended the Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes, but had to drop out to care for her sick grandmother and mother. Despite this setback, Rosa's hunger for education and self-respect never left her. In public, however, she was constantly reminded that black people were considered inferior. Schools for black children had outdated books, poor facilities, and no buses. Rosa often had to walk miles to class, watching white children pass her by in comfortable school buses. Even at a young age, she felt the difference was not just unfair, it was immoral. You see, I didn't get on the bus with the intention of being a hero, she once said later in life. I got on the bus as an ordinary person, but I was tired of giving in. Early encounters with injustice. As a teenager, Rosa witnessed the deep cruelty of the Jim Crow system. She remembered seeing black men falsely accused of crimes, beaten, or even lynched without trial. Once, a white boy pushed her. Rosa instinctively pushed him back, an act of defiance that could have gotten her killed, but instead of apologizing, she stood firm. Her mother scolded her not for what she did, but for doing it in public, where it could have had deadly consequences. Rosa never forgot the lesson. Courage was necessary, but timing and strategy could mean life or death. She also recalled being on a city bus at age 11 and seeing the driver order her off the bus because she had entered through the front door instead of the back, the door designated for black passengers. The shame and frustration she felt stayed with her for years. These moments were not isolated. They were part of a system that sought to teach her that she was less than others, that her place was always behind. But Rosa's spirit told her something else, that she was equal, that her life had value, and that one day she would act on those beliefs. Meeting Raymond Parks. In 1932, Rosa met and married Raymond Parks, a barber and choir activist who worked with the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He was a kind, supportive partner who encouraged Rosa to continue her education and join the struggle for justice. With his support, Rosa earned her high school diploma in 1933, at a time when less than 7% of Black Americans had finished high school. Raymond also introduced Rosa to political meetings, community organizing, and civil rights advocacy. While she was shy in public, Rosa listened closely, took notes, and began to develop her own quiet but firm voice. She joined the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP in 1943 and became its secretary, one of the only women in leadership at the time. "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right," Rosa would later say, a belief she had begun to shape during these formative years. Seeds of resistance. In the years leading up to her famous bus protest, Rosa Parks helped investigate cases of racial violence and sexual assault against Black women. One case that particularly moved her was that of Reese Taylor, a Black woman who had been kidnapped and gang-raped by white men in Alabama. Rosa traveled to meet Taylor and organized national attention to the case long before the Me Too movement. While many remember Rosa Parks as a woman who just sat down, the truth is that she had spent years standing up. Through quiet leadership, education, and strategic resistance. Segment 2. The Jim Crow South. The system. Rosa resisted to understand Rosa Parks' act of courage. We must understand the world she lived in, a world ruled by a system called Jim Crow. For nearly 100 years after slavery ended in the United States, Black Americans in the South were subjected to a web of laws and customs that legally enforced racial segregation and discrimination. These were not just rules, they were tools of oppression backed by fear, violence, and social control. This was the world Rosa Parks grew up in, and would later refuse to accept. What was Jim Crow? The term Jim Crow originally came from a 19th century racist stage character, but by the late 1800s it had become shorthand for a set of state and local laws in the American South. These laws were designed to separate Black and white people in nearly every aspect of daily life. By the time Rosa was born in 1913, Jim Crow was deeply embedded in Alabama and across the South. The laws made segregation legal and enforceable. Under Jim Crow, the following were strictly separated: schools, buses and trains, restaurants and lunch counters, restrooms and drinking fountains, hospitals, cemeteries, libraries, public parks. Signs labeled white only or colored were posted everywhere. Any challenge to this system was met with social punishment or deadly violence. Living under the rules, for Rosa and her family, segregation was not an abstract idea, it was a daily experience. They lived in constant awareness of their place in the social order, a place that the system tried to keep at the bottom. Rosa could not use the same entrances as white people at public buildings. She could not try on clothes in department stores. She could not eat at certain restaurants. Even the Bible used to swear oaths in court was sometimes segregated, one for white witnesses, another for black. She knew people who had been arrested, beaten, or worse for stepping out of line. One wrong word to a white person could be seen as disrespect. A look, a disagreement, or refusing to step off the sidewalk could result in arrest, assault, or lynching. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a culture of fear used to keep black people submissive and separated. The bus system, a symbol of control. One of the most humiliating and visible aspects of Jim Crow was the segregated bus system. Rosa would later describe this as one of the most painful parts of daily life. Buses in cities like Montgomery were divided. The front rows were reserved for white passengers and the back rows were for black passengers. If the white section filled up, black passengers had to give up their seats even if they had paid the same fare. In some cases, black riders were required to pay at the front of the bus, then step off and re-enter through the back door. Drivers would sometimes pull away before they could reboard, stranding them on the street. If a black person refused to give up their seat, the driver could call the police. Arrest, fines, or jail time would follow. Rosa experienced this firsthand many times. One driver, James Blake, once humiliated her in the 1940s, forcing her off the bus. That memory would stay with her for years, and Blake would be the same driver she encountered on December 1st, 1955. Resistance was risky under Jim Crow. Resisting the rules was dangerous. Even peaceful protest could result in violence, unemployment, or death. One of the most terrifying tools of Jim Crow was the practice of lynching, the public murder of black people by white mobs, often with no legal consequences. These lynchings were sometimes attended by crowds and photographed like sporting events. It was terrorism used to enforce white supremacy. In her youth, Rosa knew of many local lynchings. Everyone did. Families warned their children, don't talk back, don't look them in the eye. Survival meant silence. But Rosa's family quietly resisted. Her grandfather stayed up at night with a shotgun. Her mother and teachers emphasized pride, education, and self-respect. They taught her that while she might be legally oppressed, she was spiritually free, the fight for voting rights. Another key part of Jim Crow was voter suppression. Although the U.S. Constitution gave all citizens the right to vote, Southern states used poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation to keep black people from voting. In some counties, 80–90% of the black population was completely disenfranchised. Those who tried to register risked losing their jobs, or worse. Rosa Parks tried to register to vote multiple times before she finally succeeded. Even with a high school diploma and clear literacy, she was turned away for absurd reasons. Still, she persisted. "I had a right to vote," she later said. "I knew I had that right, and no one was going to take it away." This quiet determination became the seed of her resistance. Working for change. Carefully, Rosa's work with the NAACP in Montgomery gave her a front-row seat to the legal challenges being made against segregation. She worked on cases of police brutality, sexual violence, and voter suppression. But change came slowly. Courts often ruled against black plaintiffs. Politicians ignored their appeals. Newspapers refused to print their stories. Still, Rosa and others kept organizing. Quietly, patiently, strategically, they knew that one day an opportunity would come, a moment when someone could stand up to stand or sit down and say, enough, a lifetime of preparation. By the early 1950s, Rosa Parks was a seasoned activist. She had investigated racial crimes, fought for the right to vote, endured daily segregation, trained with civil rights leaders, participated in community education and outreach. She was not just a tired woman who wanted to sit. She was ready. She once said, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, but even more than that, she was prepared intellectually, emotionally, and morally to act when the time came. And in December 1955, that moment arrived. Segment 3. The Bus Ride that changed America. By the end of 1955, Rosa Parks was 42 years old. She was not a stranger to struggle, and she was certainly no stranger to courage, but nothing in her life had prepared her for the international spotlight that would follow one simple, quiet act on December 1st, 1955. It was a day that began like many others, but ended by changing American history forever. The setting, Montgomery, Alabama. In 1955, Montgomery, Alabama was a typical southern city ruled by the laws of Jim Crow segregation. Its buses, like nearly everything else in the South, were divided by race. The front rows were reserved for white passengers. The back rows were for black passengers. The middle rows were flex rows. Black passengers could sit there only if no white passengers were standing. If the white section filled up, black riders were expected to give up their seats and move, no matter their age, health, or dignity. Bus drivers had police-like authority. If a black passenger didn't follow their instructions, they could be removed, arrested, or even beaten. Many in Montgomery had grown used to this. They hated it, but few dared to resist it. Rosa Parks decided she'd had enough. A long day. December 1st, 1955 was a Thursday. Rosa had worked a full day at her job as a seamstress in a downtown department store. She was tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Tired of being treated as if she was less than human. Around 6 p.m., she boarded a Cleveland Avenue bus heading home. The driver was James F. Blake, a man she knew well. Years earlier, he had humiliated her by forcing her off his bus for entering through the front door. She had sworn never to ride with him again, but that day she didn't notice him when she boarded. Or perhaps she had no other option. She paid her fare and sat in the first row of the colored section near the middle of the bus. At first, everything was quiet. The confrontation. As the bus traveled its route, more passengers got on. Eventually, all the seats in the white section were filled, and one white man was left standing. The driver, Blake, turned around and saw 4 black passengers sitting in the front row of the colored section, including Rosa Parks. He ordered all 4 to give up their seats. 3 of them moved. Rosa Parks did not. She slid toward the window and remained seated, quiet, calm, still. "Are you going to stand up?" Blake asked her. "No," she replied. "Well, if you don't stand up, I'm going to have to call the police," he warned. "You may do that," she answered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. But in that moment, Rosa Parks had committed an act of civil disobedience, breaking an unjust law to stand up or sit down for what was morally right. The police were called. They boarded the bus. Rosa was arrested and charged with violating the segregation laws of Montgomery. Why Rosa? Many people later asked, why Rosa? Why then? Was she just tired? Was it planned? Rosa Parks later explained it clearly. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have an image of me being old then. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Rosa had spent years quietly resisting injustice. She had worked with the NAACP, investigated cases of racial violence, and fought to vote. Her act on the bus was not spontaneous. It was the result of a lifetime of training, awareness, and quiet courage. And that's why her community knew they could rally around her. The arrest Rosa was taken to jail. No one offered her water, no one treated her kindly. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and locked in a cell. Eventually, she was released on bail paid by E.D. Nixon, the president of the Montgomery NAACP. Nixon had been looking for a test case to challenge bus segregation in court. Rosa Parks was perfect, respected, intelligent, morally strong, and impossible to dismiss. They decided to act, planning a protest. That very night, black leaders in Montgomery met at Rosa Parks's home and began organizing a one-day bus boycott. Flyers were printed, churches spread the message. Ministers encouraged their congregations to stay off the buses on Monday, the day of Rosa's trial. It was risky. If the protest failed, it could lead to backlash. People could lose their jobs. Rosa and her family were already receiving threats, but they moved forward with faith and purpose. Monday morning. A city walks on. Monday, December 5th, 1955, the streets of Montgomery looked very different. Over 90% of black bus riders stayed off the buses. Instead, they walked to work, shared rides, or took taxis driven by black drivers charging only 10 cents, the same as the bus fare. The boycott was a stunning success. That night, thousands of people gathered at the Holt Street Baptist Church. Ministers gave speeches. Rosa Parks received a standing ovation. And a young, relatively unknown pastor named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped up to speak. There comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression, he said. We are not wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. The crowd erupted in cheers. That night, the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, was formed to lead the boycott, and Martin Luther King Jr. became its president. The Montgomery Bus Boycott had begun. What happened to Rosa? While the boycott grew, Rosa Parks' life became more difficult. She lost her job. Her husband Raymond also lost his. They received death threats and hate mail. They struggled to pay rent or buy groceries. Yet Rosa remained quietly dignified. She never asked for fame. She rarely gave speeches. She didn't seek attention. She just wanted justice and was willing to suffer for it. Her case eventually became part of a larger legal battle that challenged bus segregation at the federal level. A moment becomes a movement. The impact of Rosa Parks' decision cannot be overstated. What began as one woman saying no became a 381-day boycott that crippled the bus system, the rise of Martin Luther King Jr. as a national leader, a Supreme Court ruling declaring bus segregation unconstitutional. The spark that ignited the broader civil rights movement of the 1960s, her action was simple but historic. Segment 4. The Montgomery Bus Boycott. Rosa Parks' quiet act of courage on December 1st, 1955, did more than land her in jail. It lit the spark for one of the most powerful grassroots movements in American history, the Montgomery Bus Boycott. It began as a one-day protest, but as the buses rolled out with empty seats, the people of Montgomery realized something. They had more power than they thought. This segment tells the story of how ordinary people, maids, barbers, teachers, ministers, mothers, came together, walked together, suffered together, and won together. The immediate aftermath, Rosa Parks was arrested on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, word of her arrest had spread through the black community in Montgomery. Civil rights leader E.D. Nixon, who had bailed Rosa out of jail, saw her case as the perfect opportunity to challenge segregation in court. She was respectable, educated, and morally strong. The community trusted her. That same Friday, Nixon called local ministers, teachers, and activists. One of them was a 26-year-old pastor new to the city, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Though young and relatively unknown, King agreed to help. Over the weekend, flyers were printed and distributed by volunteers, students, and church members. The message was clear. Don't ride the bus on Monday, December 5th. Take a cab, walk, just don't ride. A city walks. On Monday morning, Montgomery awoke to a miracle. The buses were nearly empty. Black passengers, who made up about 75% of the city's ridership, had stayed off the buses. Some walked 5, 10, or even 20 miles to work. Others carpooled. Some rode bicycles. Some hired horse-drawn wagons. White employers were shocked. Some were sympathetic. Others were angry. But the message was clear. The black citizens of Montgomery were not going to suffer in silence anymore. That night, over 5,000 people packed into the Holt Street Baptist Church. There was barely space to breathe. People stood outside listening through open windows. The atmosphere was electric. Rosa Parks sat quietly in the front pew. Then Dr. King rose to speak. A new voice rises. In his powerful, calm voice, King reminded the crowd that their fight was moral, not violent. "We are not wrong," he said. "If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of this nation is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong." The crowd erupted in applause. The Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, was formed that night to lead the boycott, and King was elected president. It was official. The Montgomery Bus Boycott had begun, and it would last far longer than anyone imagined. The organization behind the movement. The boycott was carefully planned. This was not just an emotional protest. It was a strategic, coordinated campaign. Key elements included carpool systems. Hundreds of volunteers used their own cars as taxis. Riders were picked up at churches, schools, and community centers. The MIA coordinated routes and schedules like a mini transportation network. Walking committees. Many people walked long distances. To work, to shop, to church. Elderly women and children joined in. Walking became a form of resistance and pride. Fundraising. Donations poured in from across the U.S. black churches, and activists raised money for gas, car repairs, and legal fees. Church networks. Ministers spread the message from pulpits. Churches became headquarters for coordination and inspiration. The boycott was not just about buses. It became a symbol of self-respect, unity, and defiance. White backlash and pressure. The boycott stunned the white leadership of Montgomery. At first they thought it would last a few days, but as the weeks went by, they grew frustrated and afraid. In response, the city tried to break the movement. Police harassment. Carpool drivers were ticketed and arrested. Insurance cancellations. Local insurance companies refused to cover cars used in the boycott. Threats and violence. Homes were bombed, including the houses of Martin Luther King Jr. and E.D. Nixon. Job losses. Many boycott participants lost their jobs or faced economic pressure. Despite the attacks, the people held firm. Dr. King famously said, "We must meet hate with love. Violence will not drive us off the streets. We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Rosa's quiet strength. While the movement grew, Rosa Parks remained largely in the background. She was fired from her job as a seamstress. Her husband Raymond also lost his job. They received constant death threats. The Parks family faced financial hardship, but Rosa refused to back down. She later said, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not physically tired, no. The only tired I was tired of giving in." To Rosa, the boycott was not about a single bus ride. It was about a lifetime of injustice. Her action had become a movement, and that movement gave her strength. Taking the fight to court. While the boycott continued in the streets, civil rights lawyers were preparing a legal challenge in the courts. In February 1956, four black women filed a lawsuit, Browder v. Gale, arguing that bus segregation was unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. The case moved quickly through the courts. And on June 5, 1956, the Federal District Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, declaring that segregation on public buses was illegal. The city of Montgomery appealed, but on November 13, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the decision. The boycott had worked, the victory. On December 20, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court order arrived in Montgomery. The next day, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, and other leaders boarded a city bus together. And for the first time, black passengers were allowed to sit wherever they wanted. The Montgomery Bus Boycott had lasted 381 days. It was one of the most successful non-violent mass movements in U.S. history, and it reshaped the civil rights struggle. It proved that ordinary people, when united and determined, could change laws, shift power, and demand dignity. Legacy of the boycott. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was the first large-scale civil rights protest in the U.S. and marked the beginning of a new era of activism. Its legacy includes the rise of Martin Luther King Jr. as a national leader, the use of non-violent protest as a key tactic, the building of black political and economic unity, the strengthening of national civil rights networks, and at the heart of it all was one woman who chose not to move, and a city that decided to walk with her. Segment 5. Facing retaliation and rebuilding. Rosa Parks is remembered for one extraordinary act and sitting down to take a stand. But few people talk about what happened next. After the bus boycott success, many thought Rosa would be celebrated, honored, or supported. Instead, she and her family faced job loss, poverty, social rejection, and long-term suffering. This is the story of what happened after the headlines, the price she paid, and how she found strength to keep going. Victory, but not relief. On December 21, 1956, after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled bus segregation unconstitutional, Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. rode a Montgomery City bus together. In any seat they wanted, the boycott had succeeded. But Rosa's personal life? It was falling apart. She was fired from her job as a seamstress months earlier for her involvement in the protest. Her husband, Raymond Parks, had also lost his job. He worked as a barber, but his white clients no longer came. Some even threatened him. The couple was blacklisted from employment across Montgomery. Even grocery stores refused to serve her. Victory in court didn't mean victory in life. Economic repression. Rosa and Raymond quickly fell into deep poverty. Their savings ran out. They couldn't pay rent or buy enough food. They received death threats by phone and mail, and they were afraid to leave home at night. Rosa had never sought fame or attention, only dignity. But now, even with the legal win, she couldn't find basic safety or stability. Her health began to suffer. She had ulcers and chronic fatigue. Raymond, always quiet and strong, became bitter and withdrawn. Montgomery had celebrated the movement, but it turned its back on its most important face. "You give your very best to your country, Andian Nasht," Rosa said later, "and you're treated as though you've done nothing." Still active, still watching, despite her hardship, Rosa continued to watch the civil rights movement grow. In 1957, the Little Rock Nine, a group of 9 black students, faced violent mobs when they tried to attend a formerly all-white high school in Arkansas. Rosa wanted to help, but she had no money or platform. She attended meetings, wrote letters, and quietly continued to support justice from the shadows. In one letter to a friend, she wrote, "There is just so much hurt, disappointment, and oppression. I don't feel particularly hopeful, not at the moment. But I cannot give up." Her quiet honesty revealed a truth often lost in public history. Activists suffer too. They are not invincible. They bleed, they cry, they lose. But they continue. The decision to leave Montgomery. By 1957, life in Montgomery had become unbearable. Despite national attention, no jobs were offered. No protection was guaranteed. Hate still hung in the air. That year, Rosa, Raymond, and Rosa's mother moved to Detroit, Michigan, thus known as the Motor City. They hoped for a fresh start in the North. Detroit was more progressive than Montgomery, but racism still existed there, only more hidden. At first, they struggled to adjust. Raymond had trouble finding work. Rosa took temporary jobs, cleaning, sewing, even working as a housekeeper. It was humbling and often humiliating, but necessary. They never regretted their move, but they had to start over completely. A voice reemerges. Rosa stayed mostly out of the public eye throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. But when the Freedom Riders were attacked in 1961 and during the Birmingham campaign in 1963, she began to speak out again. She met with young activists, encouraged student protesters, and offered wisdom to organizers in Detroit. Though she remained soft-spoken, Rosa's presence was powerful. She reminded everyone that real change often has real costs. Later in 1963, she quietly attended the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. She was honored on stage, but not invited to speak. Few women were. Still, she smiled and stood in quiet strength, working for Congressman John Conyers. In 1965, things began to improve. A young black congressman named John Conyers had just been elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He admired Rosa Parks deeply. When he heard she was struggling to find work, he offered her a job as his secretary and receptionist. Rosa accepted, and finally, at age 52, she had a steady income and public respect. She worked with Conyers for over 20 years, helping with civil rights cases, community events, and speaking engagements. In her new role, Rosa mentored young leaders, spoke at schools, and inspired the next generation. She also visited prisons, attended protests, and supported anti-poverty efforts, connecting racial justice with economic justice. "Freedom is for everyone," she said, "and it's not free." A life of quiet resistance. While Martin Luther King Jr. became a national figure and others appeared on TV, Rosa Parks remained a background hero and someone whose courage helped start a movement but who rarely sought attention. She lived modestly, spoke carefully, and never became wealthy. She saw progress, but she also saw pain. The assassination of Dr. King in 1968 deeply affected her. So did the rise in police violence in cities like Detroit and Los Angeles. Still, she kept showing up. She spoke to school children about justice. She sat on boards of civil rights groups. She quietly supported anti-apartheid protests in South Africa and spoke out against the U.S. war in Iraq much later in life. Her words, her wisdom. Rosa Parks believed in quiet strength, spiritual grounding, and moral action. Her faith played a major role in her endurance. Some of her most powerful quotes include, "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right. I would like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free, so other people would be also free. Each person must live their life as a model for others." Her life taught that justice is not just about laws. It's about dignity, persistence, and courage in the face of silence. Segment 6. Life in Detroit and the Fight Beyond the South. When Rosa Parks and her family left Montgomery, Alabama in 1957, they left behind more than a city. They left behind the place where Rosa had helped ignite a movement. But what many people don't know is that Rosa's journey didn't end on that Montgomery bus. In fact, some of her most powerful and lasting work happened in the years that followed. In Detroit, Michigan. Detroit would become Rosa's home for the next 5 decades. Though her surroundings changed, her commitment to justice never faded, a new beginning. But not without struggle. When Rosa, her husband Raymond, and her mother Leona moved to Detroit, they were hoping for safety and a second chance. Detroit, known as the Motor City because of its booming car industry, was in the north and had no Jim Crow laws. It seemed like a better place to rebuild. But racism didn't disappear just because the laws were different. Black Detroiters faced housing discrimination, police brutality, and limited job opportunities. Segregation existed in practice, even if not in writing. Rosa often said that Detroit was the northern promised land that wasn't quite promised. At first, the Parks family lived in poverty. Rosa worked several temporary jobs, including as a housekeeper and seamstress, just to survive. Her activism had made her famous but not wealthy. She still couldn't afford a car and often had to borrow money to pay rent or buy food. But Rosa didn't come to Detroit to retire. She came to keep fighting. A different kind of racism. Rosa quickly learned that racism in the North wore a different mask. In Montgomery, racism was open and enforced by law. In Detroit, it was more subtle, but just as painful. Real estate agents refused to sell homes to black families in white neighborhoods. Police officers harassed black youth without cause. Schools were unequal. Black workers were often the last hired and the first fired. Rosa joined her new community in organizing against these injustices. She attended town hall meetings, joined local civil rights groups, and stayed active with the NAACP. She wasn't just the mother of the civil rights movement. In Detroit, she became a local leader, committed to her neighborhood, her city, and its young people, partnering with Congressman John Conyers. In 1965, Rosa Parks was hired by newly elected Congressman John Conyers, one of the first African-American members of the U.S. House of Representatives. He admired Rosa deeply and knew she had been struggling financially. He offered her a job as a secretary and receptionist in his Detroit office, a position she held for over 2 decades. Working for Conyers gave Rosa a stable income and a new platform. She helped constituents, answered letters, met with community leaders, and continued her quiet but persistent fight for justice. She also used her position to mentor young activists, encourage community education, and connect national issues to local lives. Rosa and the Black Power movement, the 1960s were a period of rapid change. As younger black activists became frustrated with the slow pace of legal reforms, a new movement emerged, Black Power. Led by figures like Stokely Carmichael, Angela Davis, and the Black Panther Party, the movement called for black pride, self-defense, and systemic change. Some assumed that Rosa Parks, a symbol of nonviolent resistance, would disapprove. But in reality, Rosa supported many of the goals of the Black Power movement. She publicly supported Angela Davis when Davis was arrested in 1970. She marched in protests, raised money for legal defense funds, and advocated for prisoners' rights. She also spoke out against police violence and housing inequality. Rosa believed that the struggle was not just about buses. It was about freedom in every aspect of life. Freedom is not just being able to sit on the bus, she said. It's being able to get an education, a job, and live in peace. Supporting global justice. Rosa's activism wasn't limited to the US. She also spoke out against apartheid in South Africa. The legal system of racial segregation enforced there for decades. She participated in marches, signed petitions, and called for the release of Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for fighting apartheid. In the 1980s and 1990s, Rosa became increasingly active in international human rights. She believed that justice had no borders and that the fight for equality was global. Life in the community. Even as she aged, Rosa Parks stayed deeply involved in her Detroit community. She attended church regularly, volunteered in schools, visited prisons, and helped families facing eviction. In 1987, she co-founded the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development, dedicated to offering leadership training and educational opportunities to youth, especially young black girls. She believed in raising up the next generation and giving them the tools to succeed with courage, education, and purpose. Each summer, her organization took teenagers on a journey across the U.S. to visit historic civil rights sites. A program called Pathways to Freedom. Rosa joined them when she could, quietly inspiring by her presence. Not just a symbol by the late 1980s, Rosa Parks had become a symbol of justice. Schools, streets, and awards were named after her, but she reminded people that she was not a statue. She was a real person who continued to struggle, organize, and believe. She once said, "People always say I didn't give up my seat because I was tired. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." And even in Detroit, decades after that historic moment, Rosa continued not to give in. Segment 7. National Recognition and Global Legacy. Rosa Parks never saw herself as a hero. In fact, when people called her the mother of the civil rights movement, she often smiled quietly and changed the subject. She didn't think she had done anything extraordinary. No, just what was right. But as the years passed, the world began to see clearly what she had done. Her small act of refusal, her brave decision to stay seated, grew into a global symbol of justice. In this segment, we'll explore how Rosa Parks was honored across the United States and the world. not just as the woman who refused to give up her seat, but as a lifelong advocate, educator, and freedom fighter. A quiet force becomes a national icon. By the 1980s and 1990s, Rosa Parks was no longer just a figure from history. She was becoming an icon. She received hundreds of invitations to speak, attend events, and receive awards. Still modest and soft spoken, she rarely gave long speeches. But when she did, her voice carried great weight. She often said she accepted awards not for herself, but on behalf of all those who stood up by sitting down. She met with presidents, foreign leaders, celebrities, and world changers. But she always preferred being around students, teachers, and young people, those she believed could shape the future. Presidential honors and national recognition. In 1996, Rosa Parks received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States. President Bill Clinton placed the medal around her neck and said, "In so many ways, Rosa Parks brought America home to our founding ideals." In 1999, she received the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can give. In the ceremony, both Democrats and Republicans praised her courage and dignity. In presenting the award, then House Speaker Dennis Hastert said, "Rosa Parks has taught us all a lesson that one person standing on principle can make a difference." These awards confirmed what millions already knew. Rosa Parks wasn't just a woman who changed America. She was a global symbol of resistance, humility, and hope. A global legacy. Rosa Parks' story was not only told in U.S. classrooms, it was taught around the world. Her name appeared in history books from Brazil to South Africa, from Germany to India. Her story was translated into dozens of languages. Documentaries, children's books, and even animated films were made about her life. School children in remote villages knew her name. She received honorary degrees from over 40 universities, despite never finishing college herself. In the UK, a plaque was placed in Westminster Abbey to honor her as one of the great moral leaders of the 20th century. In South Africa, anti-apartheid activists called her our sister in the struggle. Rosa's legacy had become international. A quiet woman whose bravery crossed borders in culture and art. Her impact reached far beyond politics. Artists, musicians, and writers honored Rosa Parks in their work. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul and fellow Detroiter, called her a personal hero. Toni Morrison wrote about her in essays. Hip-hop group Outkast released a song named Rosa Parks in 1998. Murals, sculptures, and portraits of her appeared in schools, libraries, and public buildings. In 2001, a statue of Rosa Parks was unveiled in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, a place reserved for the most honored figures in American history. She was the first African-American woman to be so honored. "She sat down so we could all stand up," said the sculptor. Personal humility. Despite all this, Rosa Parks never changed her way of life. She continued to live modestly in Detroit, often traveling by bus, rarely spending money on herself. She believed that fame should not change values and that awards should not replace action. In interviews, she always brought the conversation back to community, responsibility, and justice. "What I did was not for attention," she once said. "It was just time to say enough, later." Years. In her later years, Rosa Parks remained active despite declining health. She continued her work through the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute, supporting education, leadership training, and youth travel programs. Even as she aged, she attended events when she could. At one gathering, a child asked her, "Aren't you tired after all these years?" She smiled gently and replied, "I was tired then, but I never got tired of wanting to be free." In 2004, Rosa was diagnosed with dementia. Her public appearances became less frequent, but her impact had already become eternal. Her passing? A nation. Mons, on October 24, 2005, Rosa Parks passed away in Detroit at the age of 92. The news spread quickly across the country and around the world. Newspapers published front-page tributes. Political leaders, celebrities, and activists sent condolences. Schools held memorial events. President George W. Bush ordered that flags across the nation be flown at half-staff in her honor. In a rare event, Rosa Parks' body lay in honor in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, a tribute usually reserved for presidents and war heroes. Over 50,000 people came to pay their respects. A legacy that lives on. Rosa Parks may be gone, but her legacy lives on in countless ways. Rosa Parks Day is celebrated in several U.S. states on December 1st or February 4th, her birthday. Her former home was turned into a museum. Buses in many cities have dedicated seats marked in her honor. Youth leadership programs carry her name and message forward. More importantly, her story continues to inspire people to act with courage, to resist injustice, and to believe that one person can make a difference. What she taught the world. Rosa Parks' legacy is not about one moment on a bus, it's about doing what's right even when it's hard, staying calm in the face of injustice, believing in the power of ordinary people, fighting not just laws, but systems, beliefs, and silence. Her life showed that change doesn't always come from loud voices or big stages. Sometimes it begins with a small, quiet no. Segment 8. The Enduring Lessons of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks passed away in 2005 at the age of 92. But her story didn't end there. She didn't just make history. She reshaped how people understood power, courage, and justice. Her legacy lives on, not only in awards or holidays, but in the minds, hearts, and actions of those who learn her story. This final segment explores the enduring lessons Rosa Parks left behind. Lessons for individuals, communities, and the entire world. Lesson 1. One person can make a difference. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks made a choice. She could have stood up and moved to the back of the bus. It would have been easier, safer, and faster. Instead, she stayed seated. And in doing so, she stood up for millions. That moment shows us something powerful. You don't need to be rich, famous, or powerful to change the world. Rosa Parks wasn't a celebrity. She was a seamstress with a tired body but a strong spirit. Her small act became a giant step for civil rights. This lesson reminds us that small actions, when based on truth and justice, can ripple across the world. Lesson 2. Courage is quiet. Today, people often think of heroes as loud or dramatic, but Rosa Parks showed us a different kind of courage, the kind that's silent, still, and strong. She didn't raise her voice on the bus. She didn't fight the police. She didn't seek the spotlight. Yet her strength changed history. Her courage teaches us that bravery isn't always about fighting back with fists. It's about holding your ground with dignity. It's about saying no when the world expects yes. Rosa Parks showed that real courage often happens when no one is watching and when the cost is high. Lesson 3. Injustice. Anywhere affects everyone. Rosa Parks understood that injustice in one place often means injustice everywhere. Her protest wasn't just about buses, It was about a system that told black people they were less than. Her resistance targeted laws, yes, but also ideas, habits, and silence. This lesson is global. Whether it's racism, poverty, gender inequality, or religious oppression, standing up to any injustice helps lift everyone. Each time you stand for justice, Rosa once said, you push the world a little closer to what it should be. Lesson 4. Patience, persistence. Change the bus boycott that followed Rosa's arrest lasted 381 days. That's over a year of walking, suffering, sacrificing, all without certainty of victory. Rosa didn't lead marches or give big speeches, but she stood with others. She showed up, she waited, she endured. Her life teaches us that real change takes time. You don't always see the results right away. But if you're persistent and if you believe in something greater than yourself, you will make an impact. In a world that values fast results, Rosa Parks teaches the power of slow, steady moral resistance. Lesson 5. Equality requires action. Rosa Parks didn't sit down on the bus because she wanted to be famous. She did it because she believed everyone deserves equal rights. But she didn't stop after her one act. She continued fighting for education, housing, fair pay, voting rights, and youth leadership for decades. Her life reminds us equality doesn't come automatically. It must be built, defended, and reimagined every generation. Freedom is not free, Rosa said. You have to fight for it every day. Lesson 6. Education is empowerment. Rosa never finished college, but she believed deeply in the power of education. She read constantly, studied Black history, and encouraged young people to become educated, informed, and prepared. She co-founded the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute because she believed that young people needed more than dreams. They needed knowledge, support, and guidance. Her programs didn't just teach history. They taught leadership, self-confidence, and critical thinking, skills that are essential for any kind of freedom. We must prepare our youth to take their place in society, she often said, not just to survive, but to lead. Lesson 7. Dignity is power. Even when Rosa had nothing, no job, no money, no protection, she had one thing: dignity. She held her head high. She stayed calm in front of reporters, police, and angry neighbors. She treated others with respect, even when she didn't receive it in return. That sense of self-worth gave her unshakable power. Today, many people feel powerless in the face of injustice. Rosa's life reminds us you can be poor but powerful, unknown but unforgettable, quiet but revolutionary, as long as you know your worth. Lesson 8. History is made by ordinary people. When we read history books, we often see pictures of presidents, generals, and powerful men. But Rosa Parks was none of these. She was an ordinary woman, working a regular job, riding a public bus, living in a segregated neighborhood, and yet she changed the world. This may be the most important lesson of all. You don't have to wait for someone else to fix things. You can begin now, where you are, with what you have. Rosa's story belongs to all of us and invites each of us to write our own chapter in the struggle for justice. Thanks for watching. If you found Rosa Parks' story inspiring and it helped you improve your English listening skills, then don't forget to like this video, comment below. What lesson from Rosa Parks inspired you most? Subscribe for more real-life stories and listen in practice. Share this with someone who's learning English or loves history. Keep learning English through stories that matter. Remember, one voice can start a movement. Yours might be next.